The next morning, during breakfast, Mary and Aunt Silver sat together, chatting. "My dear," Aunt Silver began, "you and Daniel have gotten really close. Are you absolutely sure about this relationship?" "Big Aunt, you know me," Mary replied with a smile. "I always think things through before making decisions. I really love Daniel, and he loves me too. It's not just about the gifts or the traveling, shopping, or our future plans. We're completely in sync. I've found my person, Big Aunt." Aunt Silver looked thoughtful. "That's good to hear. But you mentioned feeling weird when he told you about meeting his mom. Why do you think that is?" Mary sighed. "I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it. It just made me a little nervous." "Don't worry, my dear," Aunt Silver said kindly. "Everything will fall into place. You might be surprised at how well it goes. Stay positive." "Thank you, Big Aunt," Mary said, feeling reassured. "So, when are you going to meet her?" Aunt Silver asked. "He's coming to pick me up at 6 p.m., Mary said. "All right then," Aunt Silver replied. "All the best, dear, and remember, be on your best behavior." Mary chuckled. "I will, Big Aunt." They continued their breakfast peacefully. Later that day, Aunt Silver took Mary to the spa, salon, and even shopping, ensuring she looked her absolute best. When it came to table manners, Aunt Silver didn't worry. She had raised Mary well. That evening, Daniel arrived at Mary's house to pick her up. When they reached Daniel's home, he opened the door and smiled. "Welcome to my humble abode," he said warmly. Mary looked around and smiled. "Your house is beautiful," she said. Daniel grinned. "Thank you, my love. But this is also your house. Please, make yourself comfortable. Let me get you something to drink." He went upstairs to inform his mother that Mary had arrived. "All right, my son," his mom replied with a smile. "I can't wait to meet her. Let me change into something nice, and I'll be right down." Meanwhile, Daniel returned to the living room with a glass of juice for Mary. "Thank you," Mary said politely, taking the glass. Upstairs, Daniel's mom opened her black calabash, rubbed a strange powder on her palms, and headed downstairs. As she walked into the living room, she smiled warmly. "Oh, look at this. My son has brought home a beautiful lady," she said. Mary quickly stood up and knelt down to greet her. "Good evening, Ma," Mary said respectfully. "Ah, my daughter, please stand up," Daniel's mom said with a gentle laugh. "You're welcome." She reached out and hugged Mary warmly, her hands lingering a little too long. "So you're the one who's stolen my son's heart?" she added jokingly, though her tone very soft and flat, but felt strange to Mary. Unsure, Mary brushed it off, thinking it was just her way of teasing. At the dinner table, they enjoyed a delicious meal. Daniel's mom turned to Mary. "Where are you from, my dear?" "I'm from Delta, Ma," Mary replied politely. "And your parents?" his mom asked curiously. Mary's expression softened. "They passed away many years ago, Ma. My big aunt has been taking care of me ever since." "Oh, I see," Daniel's mom said, her tone hard to read. After a pause, she smiled again. "Well, I can see you're making my son very happy. Keep it up, my daughter. You're welcome to this family." "Thank you, Ma," Mary said, smiling with relief. "Thank you, Mom," Daniel added, beaming. The evening ended smoothly, but deep in Mary's heart, something about the encounter felt a little odd. When Mary arrived home, she sat with Aunt Silver to share everything about her visit to Daniel's house. After listening carefully, Aunt Silver frowned thoughtfully. "Well, tomorrow is Sunday. We'll go to church and speak with the pastor. Let him pray for you and give us some guidance." "Big Aunt," Mary said hesitantly. "Since I got back, I've been feeling strange. I can't explain it, but something feels off. His mom seems nice, but there's something about her I can't put my finger on." "Don't worry, my dear," Aunt Silver reassured her. "We'll see the pastor tomorrow, and everything will be fine." That night, Corn went to her secret place, speaking with the Queen Mother. "Did you do it?" the Queen Mother asked, her voice cold and sharp. "Yes, my queen, it's done. She won't even know what hit her," Corn replied confidently. "Good, my daughter. You're learning well. I learned from the best, my queen," Corn said, bowing respectfully to the mirror. The next day, after church service, Aunt Silver and Mary sat in the pastor's office, explaining everything that had been happening. The pastor listened attentively, then prayed for a moment before speaking. "My daughter," he said, "may I see a picture of this young man you're talking about?" "Yes, Pastor," Mary replied, taking her phone and showing him Daniel's picture. The pastor studied the image for a moment before asking, "Why do you want to settle down with this man, Pastor?" Mary began. "He's a man of vision, kind-hearted, and he has all the qualities I want in a husband." That's good," the pastor said. "But you mentioned something about his mother." "Yes, Pastor," Mary said, describing her strange feelings and observations during the visit. The pastor nodded slowly, then looked at her with a serious expression. "You've made a good choice, my daughter, but I must tell you, I don't see you with this man in the future. It will take the grace of God to make it work." Mary was shocked. "But Pastor, I love Daniel. I can't imagine myself with anyone else." The pastor held up his hand gently. "Listen to me, my daughter. I see someone else by your side. Someone who is already close to you. This man truly loves you. He won't give you stress in marriage and will bring you the peace you've always wanted." Mary looked confused. "Pastor, there's no one else. The only other man close to me is just a friend. I don't feel anything romantic for him." The pastor smiled kindly. "My daughter, before entering marriage, you must look deeply into the foundation of where you're going. It's not just about love. It's about understanding the environment you're stepping into. You need to be fully prepared." "But Pastor," Mary said firmly, "I am prepared for marriage. I've thought about this deeply, and I want to be with Daniel." Aunt Silva placed a calming hand on Mary's shoulder. "Take it easy, my dear. Let's think things through." The pastor nodded. "If Daniel is truly your choice, bring him here. I'll pray for both of you before you take the next step." "Okay, Pastor," Mary said, still determined. She and Aunt Silva thanked him and left the office. As they walked out, Aunt Silva looked at Mary and said softly, "My dear, the pastor is wise. Let's not rush. Whatever is meant to be will happen." Mary nodded, though her heart was heavy with thoughts. At Daniel's house, he sat down with his mother and spoke confidently. "Mom, I love Mary, and I've decided to take the next step. I want to marry her. What do you think?" The word marry seemed to freeze his mother for a moment. She quickly recovered and forced a laugh. "Ha ha, my son, that's wonderful news," she said with a wide smile. "Now I'll get to have my own grandchild." Her excitement appeared genuine as she added, "I fully support your decision, my son." "Thank you, Mom," Daniel replied, feeling relieved. Later, while Daniel and Mary were out enjoying their day, Mary brought up an important topic. "Babe," Mary began, "marriage is a big decision, and I believe we need God's guidance. I'd love for us to meet my pastor so he can pray for us. Prayer is the key to everything. What do you think?" Daniel smiled and nodded. "That's a great idea, my love. I'm with you on this." The next day, they went to meet Mary's pastor. Seated in his office, the pastor welcomed them warmly. "You're both welcome," he said, gesturing for them to sit. As the pastor closed his eyes to pray, he suddenly sensed a strong, negative energy filling the room. When he opened his eyes, he realized the energy was coming from Daniel. He hesitated for a moment, his expression turning serious, but he chose his words carefully. Looking at Daniel, the pastor asked, "My son, why do you want to marry this young woman?" Daniel smiled warmly and said, "Pastor, she's the love of my life. She's God-fearing, kind, and everything I want in a wife. She makes me happy." The pastor nodded. "That's very good," he said, then asked, "Are you ready to stand by her side and fight for your marriage when challenges come?" Daniel looked at Mary, holding her hand tightly. "Yes, Pastor. Together, we'll face anything that comes our way." The pastor sighed deeply before speaking again. "My son, what I'm seeing ahead of you both is a big battle. It's bigger than the two of you, but it's not bigger than God." Daniel and Mary looked at each other confused. "A battle?" they said in unison. "Yes, a very big battle," the pastor said. "But don't be afraid. God always protects his own. Stay close to him, pray together, and rely on his strength. With God, you will win." He prayed for them, asking God to guide and protect their union, and sent them on their way. After they left, the pastor remained in his office. He knelt down and prayed earnestly. "Oh Lord," he cried out, "please save them. What I see is beyond their strength. By your mercy, I want to stand as their backup in this fight. Give me the grace to intercede on their behalf, because victory belongs to you, Lord. Tears filled his eyes as he continued to pray, asking for divine intervention and protection over Daniel and Mary. After Mary and Daniel's wedding, Mary settled into her new home. Though happy, she already missed her big aunt Silver. Picking up her phone, she called her. "Big Aunt, I miss you so much," Mary said warmly. "Oh, my child, don't let your husband hear that. He might get jealous of me," Aunt Silver joked with a laugh. "I miss you too, dear. How's your new home?" she asked. "It's wonderful. I'm enjoying it a lot," Mary replied. "That's good to hear," Aunt Silver said with a sigh. "But since you left, this big house feels so empty and lonely without you," Mary chuckled. "Big Aunt, maybe it's time for you to think about settling down again. What do you think?" "Not for me, my child. Maybe in the future," Aunt Silver said softly. "Okay, Big Aunt. I'll visit you often so you won't miss me too much. I love you," Mary said. "I love you too, my dear," Aunt Silver replied. The next morning, Daniel's mom came downstairs holding a small black cat in her arms. "Look what I brought home," she said with excitement. Mary and Daniel turned to see her holding the cat. "Mom, you got a cat? I didn't know you liked cats," Mary said, surprised. "Even I've never seen my mom with a cat," Daniel added. "Well, now you know," she replied cheerfully. "Cats are good company, and they chase rats away from the house." "But Mom, we don't have rats in this house," Daniel said. His mom shrugged. "It still makes me happy," she said. "If it makes you happy, that's all that matters," Daniel said with a smile. "Mom, can I hold it?" Mary asked. "Of course, dear. Come closer," Daniel's mom said, holding out the cat. As Mary reached out, the cat suddenly hissed, extended its claws, and jumped out of her hands, running upstairs. Mary was startled. "What just happened?" Daniel's mom laughed quietly to herself, but hid it from the others. "Maybe the cat is just hungry," she said with a smile. "Yeah, maybe," Daniel agreed. Later, as Daniel and Mary sat together, Mary remarked, "I've noticed something about your mom. She really loves black. Even her cat is black." "Yes, she loves black. She says it suits her," Daniel said with a shrug. That night, while Daniel and Mary were sleeping, the black cat crept into their room. It jumped onto the bed and curled up by the corner. Mary woke up in the middle of the night and was startled to see the cat lying there. "Daniel, wake up," she whispered urgently, shaking him awake. "What is it?" he asked groggily. "Look, the cat is on our bed," Mary said, pointing to it. Daniel sat up, confused. "How did it get in here? Did we forget to lock the door?" He got up to check the door and found it unlocked. "I must have forgotten to lock it," he said. He picked up the cat and placed it at the corner of the room, then climbed back into bed and hugged Mary. The cat began meowing loudly, disturbing their peace. "What's wrong with this cat?" Mary asked, frustrated. "I'll take it back to Mom's room," Daniel carrying the cat again. When he entered his mother's room, he found her lying down and groaning in pain. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked, concerned. "My back hurts terribly, and I can't sleep," she replied. "Why do you have the cat with you?" "It was in our room, so I brought it back," Daniel explained. "Oh, thank you, son. I must have forgotten to lock my door," she said. "Can you help massage my back? The pain is unbearable." "Of course, Mom." Back in Daniel's room, Mary waited for her husband, but he was taking too long. Curious, she decided to check on him. When she entered his mother's room, she saw Daniel massaging his mom's back. Her eyes briefly caught a strange look on her mother-in-law's face, a look of enjoyment that made Mary uncomfortable, but when she blinked, the expression seemed to change to one of pain. "I must be imagining things," Mary thought. She smiled and said, "Mom, you should have called me to help." Daniel's mom smiled back. "No need, dear. Your husband is done already. Thank you, my son. Let's head back to our room," Daniel said to Mary. "Good night, my children. Sleep well," his mom said, waving them off. As Daniel and Mary walked back to their room, Mary couldn't shake off the strange feelings she had about her mother-in-law. Meanwhile, Aunt Silver, who was sleeping in her own house, suddenly fell into a dream. In the dream, she saw a dark, eerie place filled with trees and bushes. Mary was there, crying and struggling with a dark figure who was trying to take her baby from her arms. "I will not let you take my child. Please, leave my baby alone," Mary sobbed. The dark figure kicked Mary's leg, causing her to fall. As she hit the ground, the figure snatched the baby from her arms and vanished into thin air. Aunt Silva woke up in shock, drenched in sweat. Her heart pounded as she knelt to pray, asking God for help. She grabbed her phone and called Mary immediately. The phone ringing startled Mary, who was about to sleep, and she answered groggily. "Hello, Big Aunt. It's late. Is everything all right?" "Mary, this is not the time to sleep. Open your eyes and listen carefully." "Aunt, we're not sleeping. We're awake already," Mary said. She sat upright. Together, they put the phone on speaker as Aunt Silva narrated her dream. When she finished, both Mary and Daniel were in shock. "What should we do now?" Daniel asked. "We need to call the man of God," Aunt Silva said firmly. Mary and Daniel quickly called their pastor and explained everything. The pastor prayed for them over the phone and asked them to visit him the next day for more prayers. The next morning, Mary and Aunt Silva went to see the man of God, while Daniel went to work. For 6 long years, Mary had been trying to conceive, but every time she thought she might be pregnant, her hopes were dashed. She would experience symptoms of pregnancy, morning sickness, cravings, and fatigue. But when she visited the doctor, the result was always the same. "You're not pregnant, Mom." What made it even stranger was that whenever Mary felt these symptoms, her mother-in-law would complain about terrible back pain. Daniel would always be the one to massage his mother's back. And by the next morning, Mary's monthly flow would return. The pattern continued, leaving Mary deeply troubled. So this dream Aunt Silva had last night prompted the urgent decision of them going to meet the man of God. Mary and Aunt Silva sat in the pastor's office. Mary explained everything that had been happening, tears filling her eyes as she spoke. The pastor listened carefully and then said, "My child, do you remember what I told you years ago?" "Yes, Pastor," Mary replied. "Prophecy is not always for the present. It is for the future," the pastor said. "I knew this day would come, and I've been preparing myself for this battle." "Battle?" Aunt Silva asked, startled. "Yes, a very big battle," the pastor replied. Mary leaned forward anxiously. "What do we need to do, Pastor?" The pastor looked at her intently and asked, "Who hugged you before your wedding?" Mary frowned, trying to remember. "Pastor, it's been so long, I can't recall. My friends hugged me a lot. And my mother-in-law too." The pastor nodded. "All right, my child. That's enough." Then he continued, "Your problem didn't start after marriage. It began before. Someone embraced you and transferred barrenness into your life. This kind of thing can happen through a hug, a handshake, or even words spoken over you. But in your case, it was through an embrace." Mary's eyes widened in shock. "How can that be?" she whispered. Even Aunt Silva was speechless. "This is unbelievable," she said, shaking her head. The pastor continued, "Mary, you've felt something strange for a long time, haven't you?" "Yes, Pastor, but I never understood what it was," Mary admitted. "You weren't spiritually sensitive to recognize it," the pastor said. "Sometimes our choices are not God's choices, but God won't force his will on us." "Pastor, is there any hope?" Mary asked, her voice trembling. The pastor nodded firmly. "If I pray for you, you will conceive, and you will know that God is truly God. But the real battle is keeping that child. The enemy won't give up easily, and it will require faith and prayer to win." The pastor prayed fervently for Mary, asking for God's intervention and protection. As they left his office, Mary felt both hopeful and nervous. She knew this was only the beginning of a spiritual fight, but she was determined to trust in God. When Mary got home, she sat with her husband, Daniel, in their room and told him everything the pastor had said. "I thought our struggle to have a child was the only battle," Mary began. "I didn't know there was more to it." "What could be the issue?" Daniel asked, concerned. "The pastor said someone hugged me before we got married, and that's what caused my childlessness. But he prayed for me, and now he said our faith and prayers will keep the child when it comes. So please, my husband, let's join hands in faith and pray for this baby," she said earnestly. Daniel held her hands and said, "I'm with you on this, my wife." They knelt together and prayed that night before going to bed. Meanwhile, in her room, Daniel's mother was furious. She paced the floor, muttering angrily, "How dare that pastor reveal the truth to this useless girl? Does he want me to die?" She picked up her calabash, chanting softly, and vanished to the coven. Bowing before the Queen Mother, she cried, "Queen Mother, I need your help." The Queen Mother, seated on her dark throne, smiled knowingly. "I know why you're here, my daughter. The time has come. The battle has only just begun. One by one, Other women joined their calabash together, in circle. They joined their powers together, chanting, "We'll fight this battle together. We'll see the end." Lightning flashed between them as they laughed wickedly. A month later, Mary was in the kitchen preparing breakfast for Daniel when she suddenly felt nauseous. Clutching her stomach, she ran to the restroom downstairs and began throwing up. Daniel, who was sitting at the dining table, jumped up and ran after her. "Darling, what's wrong?" he asked, gently rubbing her back. When Mary finished, she leaned against the sink, looking pale. "I've been feeling sick like this for a few days now," she said. "Then we need to see a doctor," Daniel replied. "Forget about breakfast. You're more important. Let me grab my car keys and let's go." "Okay, babe," Mary said softly. They went to the hospital, where Mary did a pregnancy test. A short while later, the doctor returned with a smile. "Congratulations, you're pregnant," Mary gasped in disbelief. "You mean I'm really pregnant?" "Yes, Mom," the doctor said. "Here's the result. Positive." With tears of joy, Mary hugged Daniel tightly. "Darling, it's true, we're having a baby." Daniel smiled, his eyes shining. "Thank God. This is truly a miracle, my love." On the way home, Mary turned to Daniel and said, "Babe, can we stop by the church? I want the pastor to be the first to know, and I'd like him to pray for the baby." "That's a great idea," Daniel said, steering the car toward the church. When they arrived, they went straight to the pastor's office and shared the good news. The pastor was overjoyed. "Thank God for his mercy and faithfulness," he exclaimed. He prayed for the baby and then looked at Mary with a serious expression. "Every midnight wake up, anoint your tummy with oil, and place your hands on it as you pray for your baby. This child is a battle, but God is with you." "I will, Pastor," Mary promised. Daniel also thanked the pastor before they left. After they left, the pastor knelt in his office to thank God. "Lord, thank you for this miracle. Please protect this child and the family." Suddenly, a cold wind blew into the room, sending chills down his spine. A dark figure materialized, dressed in black. Its voice echoed with anger. "Are you happy with what you've done?" the figure roared. "How dare you deliver my captive? Do you want me to die?" The pastor stared in shock as the figure continued. "Leave my son and that girl alone. They are my bank and they hold the key to my life." With that, the figure vanished into thin air. "Lord, I need your strength. This battle is greater than me, but I know you are greater still," and began to pray fervently, asking God for wisdom and protection. 6 months later, Mary's small baby bump began to show heavily. She had started wearing loose dresses because of her pregnancy. Ever since Mary got pregnant, her mother-in-law has been unhappy and throwing tantrums, and always stays in her room. She decided to come downstairs and saw Mary seated by herself admiring her baby bump, and a flashing anger passed on her face like it wasn't there, with plans running through her mind. "Oh, just look at my beautiful daughter!" she exclaimed with excitement. "My dear, how are you today?" she asked. "Can I feel the baby?" she asked. But then Daniel walked in and said, "Mom, please, allow my wife to rest. You can see her eating so she doesn't choke," Daniel said. "Oh, that's true," his mom said, stepping back. But inside, her heart boiled with anger. Mary, looking innocent, sat munching on a snack, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. Daniel turned to the maid, Chidera, and said, "Please prepare some fish pepper soup for my sweet wife. That's what she's taking for dinner. Make it a little spicy, with black plantains on the side, okay?" "Yes, sir. Noted," Chidera said. Around the day when Chidera was relaxing in her room, a strange event unfolded. While Chidera was sleeping, Daniel's mom's black cat suddenly appeared in the room. Startled awake, Chidera saw the cat walking into her room, its glowing blue eyes fixed on her. She tried to say something, but her words not coming out. But as she sat up, strange force entered her face down to her body and began running through her veins. She collapsed back onto her bed, unconscious. The cat's eyes returned to normal, and it quickly fled the room. That evening when Chidera was preparing dinner, she quickly slipped a black substance into the food, with a sinister smile on her face. Mary began eating, but soon felt a strange sensation. Her tummy rolled uncomfortably, and she rubbed her belly. "Baby, please behave. Just a few months left before you arrive. Let mommy eat in peace. I love you so much," she whispered, stroking her baby bump. In Daniel's mom's room, she watched everything unfold through her magical mirror and chuckled to herself. Yes, very good. My plan is working perfectly. You think you're smart, but I'll show you who's smarter, she said, a sinister smile on her face. When Daniel arrived, he saw the maid Chidera and asked where her madam is. Sir, madam is upstairs, she said. As Daniel rushed upstairs, he saw the door locked and knocked, but there was no response. And then he kicked the door open only to see the shock of his life. Is this the beginning of a fierce battle, or the end of it all? Watch out for part 3.